For 3 weeks, Daniel Carter felt something shift in the air around him, though he couldn't explain it at first. It began on a gray Sunday afternoon in their quiet neighborhood outside Portland. Rain slid down the windows in thin lines, and the house smelled like fresh coffee. Emily was upstairs folding laundry, humming softly to herself. Margaret Whitmore sat at the kitchen table across from Daniel, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She was smiling, but her eyes were sharp, studying him in a way that made him sit straighter in his chair. Daniel had always respected Margaret. She was organized, careful, and deeply protective of her only daughter. But that afternoon, her questions felt different. She asked about work, about how often he and Emily spent time together, about whether he ever felt lonely when she traveled for business. Her voice was gentle, yet every word seemed placed with intention. Daniel answered honestly. He loved his wife. He admired her drive. Yes, she traveled sometimes, but they made time for each other. Margaret nodded slowly, as if checking items off an invisible list. 2 days later, Daniel stopped at a grocery store after work. As he reached for a carton of milk, a woman beside him smiled warmly. "Daniel, right?" she asked. Her name was Linda, a friend of Margaret's. He recognized her vaguely from a holiday dinner. She began asking casual questions that quickly turned personal. Was Emily working long hours again? Did he miss having more attention? Did marriage ever feel overwhelming? Daniel laughed politely and said marriage wasn't about counting hours. It was about building something steady. Linda smiled, but there was curiosity in her eyes that lingered too long. That evening, Margaret called him. She mentioned that Linda had seen him. "She thought you seemed distracted," Margaret said carefully. Daniel felt a flicker of confusion. Distracted. He had been thinking about dinner plans, nothing more. He brushed it off, but something about the timing unsettled him. Why was Linda analyzing him in the dairy aisle? The next morning, Daniel received a message on social media from someone named Rachel Miller. Her profile picture showed a friendly smile and a casual confidence. She claimed they had met briefly at a neighborhood barbecue months ago. He barely remembered the event. Her message was light at first, asking how he'd been, then shifted slightly. She complimented his kindness and said she always appreciated a thoughtful man. Daniel stared at the screen. There was nothing inappropriate in the words, but there was an undercurrent he couldn't ignore. He didn't respond. Instead, he showed Emily that night while they were sitting on the couch. She read the message and shrugged. "People reconnect. All the time," she said, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. Daniel studied her face. She trusted him. He knew that. Yet a thin line of worry creased her forehead before she forced a smile. He felt protective instantly. He didn't want doubt creeping into their home. Over the next few days, more small moments unfolded. Margaret invited him to help reorganize boxes in her garage while Emily was away on a short trip to Vancouver. For work, Daniel agreed without hesitation. He believed in showing up for family. As they carried dusty containers, Margaret spoke casually about commitment. She mentioned how easily people changed after marriage, how temptation often appeared. Quietly, Daniel paused, resting a box on the concrete floor. "Temptation is a choice," he said calmly. Margaret looked at him carefully, as if weighing his response. Driving home that evening, Daniel replayed the conversation. He wasn't angry, just puzzled. Why did Margaret keep circling back to the same subject? He had never given her reason. To question him, he had never hidden his phone, never stayed out late without explanation, never spoken poorly of Emily. If anything, he bragged about her to his coworkers. Another message arrived from Rachel the following day. This one was longer. She mentioned how difficult modern relationships could be, and how important it was to have someone who truly understood you. She suggested meeting for coffee sometime, just to catch up. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. It was no longer a friendly greeting. It was an invitation that crossed a quiet line. He set his phone down and looked around the living room. Photos of him and Emily lined the wall. Their wedding day in Seattle, both laughing nervously under soft lights. A camping trip in the mountains where Emily had slipped in the mud and pulled him down with her. The memory made him smile. These were not fragile moments. They were real, built with patience and care. That night, he told Emily about the second message. She grew quiet again. Maybe she's just friendly, she said, but her eyes searched his face for reassurance. Daniel reached for her hand. "I don't need coffee with anyone else," he said gently. She nodded, though something unspoken hung between them. By the second week, Daniel could no longer ignore the pattern. Margaret called more often, asking subtle questions about his schedule. She mentioned hearing about couples drifting apart. She talked about the importance of honesty in marriage, always in a tone that suggested she was testing for cracks. Daniel answered calmly each time, but inside he felt a slow realization forming. This wasn't random. One evening, as he walked to his car after work, Rachel appeared again, this time in person. She claimed she had been nearby and thought she'd say hello. Her smile was bright, but her presence felt planned. She spoke warmly, praised his dedication, and repeated her offer for dinner. Daniel felt a clear line in his heart. "I'm married," he said kindly but firmly, "and I'm happy." Rachel studied him for a second, then nodded. "That's rare," she replied softly. As he drove home, the truth settled into place like pieces of a puzzle. Linda at the store, Margaret's pointed questions, Rachel's repeated messages. Was too coordinated to ignore. When he walked through the front door, Emily was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. She looked tired from travel, but smiled when she saw him. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching her move around the room with quiet focus. He felt something deeper than frustration. He felt determined. It wasn't about pride. It was about protecting the peace they had built. He approached her slowly. "Has your mom been worried about us?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, and that small pause confirmed everything. She admitted Margaret had expressed concerns. She had seen too many marriages fail. She believed time revealed a man's true character. Daniel listened without interrupting. He understood fear, but he didn't understand creating doubt where none existed. That night, as rain tapped softly against the roof, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't angry at Margaret. He knew her love for Emily ran deep. But love mixed with fear could turn into suspicion. And suspicion, if left alone, could quietly damage trust. The next morning, another message from Rachel appeared. This time, the invitation was direct. Dinner, just the two of them. No expectations, just conversation. Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment. His heartbeat was steady. His mind was clear. For 3 weeks, someone had been measuring him, watching for weakness, waiting for a misstep. He realized something important then. Loyalty wasn't proven by avoiding opportunities. It was proven by what you chose when those opportunities appeared. He looked toward the bedroom where Emily was getting ready for work. He remembered the way she squeezed his hand during their wedding vows. He remembered promising to stand beside her in ordinary days, not just perfect ones. Daniel picked up his phone. And for the first time since this strange pattern began, he felt completely certain about what he would do next. Daniel looked at his phone for a long time before typing a reply. The house was quiet, and Emily was in the bedroom getting ready for work. The message from Rachel was clear and confident. Dinner, just the two of them. No expectations. It's a chance to talk. It sounded harmless on the surface, but Daniel knew it was not innocent. Too many small coincidences had led to this moment. He didn't feel tempted. He felt disappointed. Slowly, he typed back. He thanked her for the invitation, but told her he loved his wife and would never place himself in a situation that could hurt his marriage. He wrote that loyalty was not about avoiding trouble at the last second, was about never stepping toward it in the first place. Then he paused and added one more line. Did Margaret ask you to contact me? He stared at the screen. Minutes passed. Then his phone buzzed. Yes. The single word felt heavy, yet it also brought relief. The puzzle pieces finally locked into place. The grocery store questions, the random messages, the sudden appearances. It had all been planned. Daniel didn't feel anger rising inside him. Instead, he felt a calm clarity. He had nothing to hide. But he understood something important now. This was not just about him. It was about fear that had been quietly living in his marriage. That evening, he asked Emily to sit with him at the kitchen table, the same table where Margaret had once stirred cold tea and studied him with careful eyes. Daniel told her everything about the messages, about Rachel's confession, about the test. Emily's face drained of color. She wouldn't. She whispered, but her voice lacked certainty. She did, Daniel said gently. But I don't think she meant harm. I think she's afraid. Emily looked down at her hands. For a moment she seemed torn between loyalty to her husband and loyalty to her mother. Tears formed in her eyes, not from anger, but from confusion. She's seen so much heartbreak, Emily said softly. She doesn't trust easily. Daniel reached across the table and held her hands. Trust isn't built by testing someone in secret, he said. It's built by believing in them openly. Emily nodded slowly. She knew he was right. They invited Margaret over that night. There were no raised voices when she arrived. No accusations shouted from the doorway. Just quiet tension that filled the room like thick air before a storm. Margaret stepped inside, sensing something was different. She sat down across from them. Daniel noticed her posture was stiff, her expression guarded. I spoke to Rachel, Daniel began calmly. Margaret's face changed instantly. The careful confidence she usually carried slipped away. Oh, she said, almost under her breath. She told me the truth, Daniel continued, about the messages, about the dinner invitation, about the plan. Silence spread across the kitchen. Emily looked at her mother. Mom, why? Margaret closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, they were not sharp or calculating. They were tired. I needed to know, she said quietly. I needed to be sure. Sure of what? Daniel asked, though he already understood. That you wouldn't hurt her, Margaret replied, her voice trembling for the first time. I've watched good women fall apart because they trusted too easily. I couldn't let that happen to my daughter. Daniel studied her carefully. This wasn't manipulation now. It was fear laid bare. You thought I would fail, he said, not accusing, just stating the truth. I thought if there was weakness, it would show, Margaret admitted. Better now than years later. Emily's tears finally fell. You don't test love like it's a product, she whispered. You talk about your fears. Margaret looked at her daughter and something inside her seemed to break. I didn't want to plant doubt in your mind, she said, so I carried it alone. Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of the moment settle. Up. The test planted doubt anyway, he said gently. Not about me, about trust. Margaret's shoulders lowered. She had expected anger. She had prepared for confrontation. Instead, she was facing honesty. For 3 weeks, she had watched him carefully. She had waited for a slip in his words, a secret message, a hidden meeting. She had believed temptation would reveal true character. But what she had not expected was steadiness. Daniel had shown every message to Emily. He had answered every question calmly. He had chosen transparency without knowing he was being evaluated. I'm sorry, Margaret finally said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was real. Daniel nodded. I understand wanting to protect her. I would do the same. But protection without trust becomes control. Margaret looked down at her hands. When my own marriage fell apart, she began slowly. I didn't see it coming. I trusted fully, and then everything changed overnight. Emily had heard pieces of that story before, but never the full pain behind it. Margaret rarely spoke about her past. I thought I was strong, Margaret continued, but I was blind. I promised myself my daughter would never be blind. Daniel's voice softened. Emily isn't blind. She's strong. And she chose me. The words hung in the air. Emily squeezed his hand tightly. Margaret looked between them. For the first time, she truly saw what she had doubted. Not perfection, not fantasy. But partnership.com/honest. You passed, she said quietly, almost to herself. Daniel shook his head. This wasn't about passing. I didn't know I was taking a test. I was just living my life. That realization seemed to affect Margaret deeply. Loyalty that exists only under supervision is fragile. Loyalty that stands without audience is real. The tension in the room slowly eased. Emily moved closer to her mother. You could have asked him directly, she said softly. Margaret gave a weak smile. I was afraid of the answer. Daniel stood and poured 3 cups of tea. He handed one to Margaret. The simple gesture felt symbolic. Not forgiveness declared loudly, but peace offered quietly. I'm not perfect, Daniel said. I'll make mistakes in life. A betrayal won't be one of them. Margaret nodded slowly. She believed him now, because of the test, but because of the way he handled it. Over the next few days, something shifted in the household. There were no more mysterious messages, no more strange encounters. Rachel sent a final apology and disappeared from their lives. Linda never brought up grocery store conversations again. Margaret began visiting without hidden questions. She asked about work, about dinner plans, about weekend trips, normal things. The tension that once lingered faded. One evening, Emily and Daniel sat on their porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed soft orange, and the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. Were you ever tempted? Emily asked quietly. Daniel looked at her, surprised by the question. No, he said simply, because love isn't something I look outside for. She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfort settling between them. Inside the house, Margaret washed dishes slowly, listening to their quiet laughter through the open window. She felt something she hadn't expected: peace. Not because she had confirmed her doubts, but because she had been proven wrong. She realized something important. Trust cannot grow in shadows. It grows in light. 3 weeks had tested more than Daniel's faithfulness. They had tested fear, control, and the meaning of protection. In the end, what survived wasn't suspicion, it was honesty. And in that honesty, their family became stronger than before.